South Africa needs to focus on how COVID-19 will reshape its labour market, as the economic impact of the pandemic could take some time. That's according to David Francis from Wits. He joins me now to elaborate further on that. A very good morning to you. Tell us exactly what you mean by that.
Morning, Rebecca. Thanks for having me on the show. I think, there was a lot of focus on our headline employment numbers, which for the first quarter 2020 were released yesterday, and we saw very sadly another increase of a percentage point in our unemployment rates. But that only takes us up to the end of March, which covers the first week of the lockdown. So the impact on the labour market that we're going to see from the lockdown and from the pandemic is going to take some time to be seen. I think our concern is that there's often a focus on the headline number, the total number of people who are employed and unemployed, but that hides a lot of really important detail that I think is going to be crucial in dealing with the lockdown. And there are four areas really where that's important. The first is in the informal sector. Then there's kind of job churn and turbulence in the labour market, the impact of capital intensity, and the gender impact of the lockdown. So on the informal sector, there's often this belief in economics that the informal sector acts as a sort of shock absorber. When the formal economy is in trouble and people lose their jobs, they get jobs in the informal sector. Those are often more precarious or badly paid, but at least there's a job. But unfortunately, in South Africa, the evidence from the previous crisis in 2008 and subsequent is that both our formal and informal sectors suffer shocks in the same way. So people lose jobs in the formal sector, but they also lose jobs in the informal sector. And so the informal sector is not acting as this buffer to absorb people who lose their job in the formal sector.
And obviously that affects a staggering number of people.
Yeah, in South Africa, we've got about 16 million people who are employed. 5 million of those have informal jobs. So it's almost a third, it's about 34% of our labour market works in the informal sector. And in fact, unfortunately, the design of the lockdown was more strict on informal trading. If you owned a formal grocery store, you were allowed to continue during lockdown. In the beginning of the lockdown, if you were an informal fruit and veg seller, for example, you weren't allowed to trade. And so, in fact, we think that there's going to be a disproportionate impact on the informal sector, who are really the most precarious and vulnerable
And what about
workers.
gender equality?
So really interesting and worrying about the current crisis. In general, financial crises like the 2008 one seem to affect men disproportionately, and that's because we have inequality in the way jobs are distributed in the economy. Men still have disproportionate number of jobs in finance or in business, and in a normal financial crisis, those are the sectors that really suffer, and so men lose more jobs. In this crisis, because again, the nature of the lockdown, the distribution of work, it seems that the majority of job losses are going to be concentrated in the services sector, in retail, in personal services. And those sectors still employ a majority of women. And so if they're the sectors that get the most job losses, then we're going to see a disproportionate burden on women losing jobs in the South African labour market. And that's a really big problem for equality and justice, because women in the labour market are already, even when they do the same jobs as men, they're still paid less than men, because of pervasive gender inequality in the labour market. So it's a real concern, and it's something, that's obscured by the headline numbers, but something we're going to have to watch very closely.
How close are we to getting a true picture of what's going on?
Some of the changes are going to take months and years, and we're going to have to monitor it very closely. But in terms of the data that we would look at as economists to make this decision, we've got 3 months to wait. So the quarter one job information came out yesterday. The quarter two, which would be April, May, and June, will come out in 3 more months. So we've got quite a wait still before we start getting a picture of where those job losses are, who's been affected.
And the impact, I guess, on goods and services too is an important factor.
Yes, I mean, in terms of job churn, so you have people who lose jobs, but there's also people who get jobs, and it's going to be very important to watch how people who lose their jobs being a waiter in a restaurant, do they then get a job as a delivery driver? What are the conditions of work that they have? How does that affect, how distribution chains work? It's something that we're going to have to watch very closely, how work is reallocated and whether that is good or bad for workers. Do they lose a job and get a worse, more precarious, low-paid job with worse working conditions? I think we're going to see quite a lot of that when the new statistics come out.
David Francis, thank you.